And we're back, and thanks for joining us for this session on the DoD Cloud Exchange. And we're going to get a little bit of an industry perspective today with Jim Smid, who is the principal architect for the DoD and intelligence community at Palo Alto Networks. And over the course of what used to be called the DoD Cloud Exchange over the years, and now it's called the DoD Modernization Exchange, the conversation really has evolved from a place where DoD was just figuring out how to, in some cases, lift and shift workloads from traditional data centers into the cloud to how to use data to now how to secure data. And I think we want to spend some time on that security side right up front here, Jim. So much has happened in really just the past year on the AI front, specifically. Federal agencies obviously interested in figuring out how to use AI for many, many purposes, including defense. But I think there's also concern that maybe not keeping up as quickly as the adversaries are in terms of figuring out how to use AI as a potential attack tool. So I'd love your thoughts on how that has started to change the equation in terms of what federal agencies and DoD specifically need to be thinking about in terms of what AI does and what they need to be thinking about defense.
Sure, absolutely. I like to use the three S's. It's the speed, the scale, and the sophistication of the attacks. It's really meant that the operators have so much more to deal with. The attacks are more clever than they used to be. We're seeing them get in and out. What used to take days or weeks, we're seeing that fully complete an exfiltration of data or whatever the adversary is in for. That happens in a matter of hours. So you have a much shorter period of time to catch them. And then the scale is just the sheer number of alerts and data coming at an operator to try to catch things and find that needle in the haystack has become all that much more difficult.
With the proliferation of those tools that can move so quickly, is it even practical at this point to catch an attack like the one you're just describing, an exfiltration, while it's still in progress?
Absolutely. And that really gets into where automation and artificial intelligence come in. And we use artificial intelligence and automation with all of our tools. And the important thing is, first of all, be able to have a platform where you're not using multiple tools to do inspection. So this inline inspection and be able to very quickly be able to analyze things and do that in a very quick way. People talk about different kinds of AI, and I think one that doesn't get talked about a lot or people aren't familiar with is agentic AI, and that's inherent into what happens with our operations tools. And agentic AI really just means that it's autonomous, that it's got an action associated with it, something that it's going to do, and that it continues to learn over time. So you think about that from a speed of an attack that comes in. If I know that, let's say something simple like a user account has been infiltrated, I want to make sure I turn that account off first and foremost, right? And you don't want to wait for an analyst to find it or do something about it. Go ahead and turn that off, create a ticket, alert people that an incident has happened, and go from there. So it's really important that we are using that, and we're injecting more and more of that agentic AI into our tools all the time. So we have the data, and we're at the tip of the spear when it comes to what we're seeing from nation states that are coming in and from adversaries that are coming in and looking to make exploitations. So we have the ability to kind of help and put that AI, make it part of the tools so that you knew you're doing a correct action, you actually do have an attack, and you're doing something about it very rapidly and not waiting for something to happen and then going back and trying to figure out when that happened or how it happened afterwards. So that time frame has really been reduced, and that it's so critical that you have both the automation and the artificial intelligence built in to handle it.
Yeah, and it seems like the conversation sometimes is that there's, especially from a government perspective, there's almost an inverse relationship between the amount of autonomy involved in a system and the level of trust that a government customer might have in it, because there's a perception anyway that that's less and less human in the loop. Do we really trust this tool? So how do you incorporate something that has that degree of autonomy in it that can move as quickly as you're talking about in a way that a customer feels like it can trust?
Yeah, there's always a balance, I think, between what things you want to be automated and when it's important to have somebody that is getting eyes on. And oftentimes, when we'll see an incident come through, so those will come from a variety of different data sources, and oftentimes it might be over 100 different alerts. We are basically stitching those alerts together we're giving them actionable intelligence to come out of that. And we're going to do some things that they would be proactive, but they wouldn't necessarily be destructive from a standpoint of what we're going to automate. So you're going to not just have one action out of it, you're going to have multiple actions. And just in that simple use case I gave you before, you want to turn off that account. That's not going to harm anything. You want to make sure that you've done that, because now we know that that person, we've stopped the attack. And then you want to bring somebody into the loop to say, okay, here's the incident, here's what happened, here's what was affected. So you start a couple different manual processes as well. Now that can differ depending on the kind of incidents. And I think where the trust comes in with somebody like Palo Alto Networks, we see more data than anybody in the from a cyber perspective of what these attacks look like. And because we have real data and we have the amount of data we have, and we see what these attacks look like, and we know how to handle those, there is a level of trust that Palo Alto Networks knows the best case scenarios when you want to add some automation into it. And that any artificial intelligence problem is inherently a data problem. And so when you have tools that don't potentially have the amount of data, or they're using synthetic data that's being generated by a computer, not real life data, that's where I think that trust, you have to question a little bit what's going to happen at the back end. We don't introduce artificial intelligence and those algorithms until we know specifically this is what we're seeing on the front lines. This is an attack. These are the proactive steps we can take. These are recommendations we can make to an operator. And that's really important for the DoD, because we oftentimes have operators that aren't potentially as experienced as we do in other markets. If you have somebody that just rotated in and they've only been in the job for a few months, how do you harness the ability of artificial intelligence to make recommendations, to be a co-pilot sitting next to them, to tell them things that they could potentially do based on best practices? And how do you give them things like large language models that they can go and ask questions of, why is this important? How do I stop this? What does this change mean? So all of those tools, and all of them different varieties of artificial intelligence, are really helping DoD operators be more effective and efficient at their jobs.
And as much of an appetite as there is in DoD to adopt AI for all kinds of use cases, including cyber defense, one of the challenges that we hear about all the time is, how do I scale this, especially considering the fragmented nature of DoD networks? You may not always have a scenario where a 10th fleet, for example, can even see all of the Navy's networks at one time on a single pane of glass. How is that challenge meaningfully different from what you all see in the private sector, if it is, and how are you helping government customers address that kind of fragmentation and scale?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that always comes up is integration. And when you talk to DoD leadership, they've had this proliferation of tools, proliferation of networks. How do they get data? It's not a problem that they aren't collecting the data. The problem is that they're not able to coalesce that data. They're maybe not able to stitch the data together. So I always recommend that a good first step, and this is really for zero trust in general and for simplifying what they're doing in the network, is to use the automation and orchestration tools that you're starting to take disparate information and stitch that together in a way that makes sense, and you can get the most mission intelligence out of that information, instead of it residing in these different silos, and you have this manual process to go and figure out what's where and why that's important.
Only got about a minute left, and this is a totally unfair question to ask in a minute, but how does quantum play into all of this? Another thing that's really burst into the public consciousness in really just the last year or two.
Sure.
Talk about that challenge.
Yeah, there's been a lot of news lately out of adversarial nations like China in terms of the amount of work that has been put into quantum computers. I think where that really means to us from a cybersecurity perspective is that we know that the time will come eventually when they have a quantum computer that is fast enough to break the PKI, the cryptography we're using today. So we have these nations gathering data, even if it's encrypted today. When they can crack the key on that with a quantum computer, they'll be able to decrypt the information. Much of that data is still relevant and will be relevant in the future. So that will complicate things a little bit. You're going to have to make some really good decisions in terms of where you want to use your break and inspect, where you want to move the different cybersecurity protections that you have, things like secure enterprise browser, which is a big part of our network security space. Those things really inject some solutions there that you can alleviate some of the overhead that will come from a break and inspect piece. We know we have to get after the ball and start deploying quantum. So making sure you have a partner, somebody that like Palo Alto Networks, that we're looking at not only the security side, but also what's happening with the quantum side to look at those and help make recommendations for our customers.
All right. We do have to leave it there for time, but really great insights, and I really appreciate it. Jim Smid is the principal architect for the DoD and intelligence community at Palo Alto Networks. Jim, thanks so much for doing this.
Great. Thank you.
And I'm Deputy Editor Jared Serbu, and you're watching Federal News Network. Now we'll send you back to the studio for more on the DoD Modernization Exchange.